Good day to all good people. We're on the YouTube channel of Mark Solonin. The date on everyone's calendar today is August 6th, 2025. Besides everything else, this date marks the somber 80th anniversary of the first atomic bombing of a city. But that's not my main concern today. What's more relevant is that, right now, on August 6th, in Poland, the inauguration of the new president, Mr. Naranowski, is taking place. Naturally, I congratulate him, and on your behalf, wish him success in his important work. For Poland has been, and remains, one of Ukraine's most reliable and generous allies in the current fight against Russian aggression. I believe this day is an appropriate occasion to recall an important matter, one which, in my subjective opinion, should not be forgotten, and which the new President of the Republic of Poland ought to address. I am referring to something we have already discussed extensively on this channel, and frankly, ours is one of the very few, if not the only, YouTube channels that has been talking about it for years, loudly and in detail. I mean the killing of former Polish President Lech Kaczyński, along with the entire Polish delegation and many other senior respected figures of Poland, a killing that occurred on April 10th, 2010. Before we get to the new developments that have emerged in the 4 years since my last video on this tragedy, let me briefly remind you of the facts. The disaster on April 10th, 2010 at the Smolensk North airfield was extraordinary in at least two ways. First, the victims. Yes, all people have the right to life, but the fact that in one crash, in one single instant, a country's president is gone, along with its top leadership, along with prominent political and public figures, all in one plane, all in one blow. This simply hasn't happened, at least since the middle of the last century, and, God willing, may it never happen again. An absolute one-of-a-kind event. Second, the technical side. The 2154 was in perfect working order. Absolutely perfect. It was performing a normal flight. Every single system, right up to the last seconds, was functioning flawlessly. And yet this fully serviceable aircraft made an unplanned emergency landing short of the runway and came down, gear down, in a thin, scraggly little forest. It was April. The spring mud hadn't dried yet. The ground was soft, damp, almost swampy in places. The plane hit and did not catch fire. Despite these three crucial facts, a fully functional plane up to the last seconds, no collision with cliffs, buildings, or any man-made structure, and no fire on the ground. Every single one of the 96 people aboard died on the spot. All of them, not one survivor. Over the years, we haven't been able to find a single other case like this. A sound plane, no vertical obstacle, no massive fire, and yet total, instant death. I've asked our viewers, 2.5 million views on that earlier video. No one came up with another example. And in these past 4 years, with the rise of so-called artificial intelligence, I've asked multiple AI systems as well. They couldn't find one either. I can't swear on my life it is literally the only such case in aviation history. But it is, without a doubt, an extremely rare, extraordinary event. Take, for example, a very fresh case. December 25th of last year, 2024, an Azerbaijani passenger aircraft, an Embraer belonging to Azerbaijan Airlines. I won't now go deep into the circumstances that led to the crash. That's not the point here. What matters is this. The plane attempted to land in the city of Aktau, Kazakhstan. It didn't quite make it to the runway and went down just short of it. Here, what you see before you is the crushed, overturned tail section of that Embraer. From that mangled piece of wreckage, rescuers pulled out 29 living people. 29? Yes, sadly. 38 people died, but nearly half of those on board survived. And mind you, that's what the wreckage looked like after the crash, when the plane was already lying there, ripped open, twisted, turned upside down. At the moment of the crash, it looked far worse. And yet, from that hellish mess, 29 people emerged alive. So when we look back at Smolensk, the fact that everyone on board died instantly, before anyone could even be transported to a hospital, in a crash where there was no fire, that is extremely, extremely strange. Everyone understands. If a dog bites a man, no special investigation is needed. But if a man bites a dog, now that is a bizarre event, and the reasons behind it demand the most careful examination. The Smolensk catastrophe was just such a bizarre, out-of-the-ordinary, abnormal aviation disaster. And it obviously required an equally out-of-the-ordinary, serious, thorough investigation. And indeed, the investigation that followed was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary, though not in the sense anyone would want. It began by violating one of the most basic, ancient, fundamental principles of justice. A principle recorded in Roman law thousands of years ago, known to any civilized person. No one can be a judge in their own case. You cannot have the same party, or their police, their investigators, acting simultaneously as suspect, investigator, and judge. That's not justice. That's a mockery of justice, a grotesque parody of it. And yet that is precisely what was done. Russia, the country with the most direct involvement in this tragedy, and potentially we cannot rule it out, one of the main suspects, Russia completely monopolized the entire investigation. Why Russia? Well, let's lay it out. First, the aircraft was a Russian-built Tu-154, manufactured in a Russian factory. Second, just 6 months before the disaster, the plane underwent scheduled maintenance. Where? In Russia, at a Russian facility. Third, the crash happened on the territory of the Russian Federation, not somewhere high above the taiga, but as the aircraft was descending to land at a Russian airfield, that means it was in contact with Russian ground equipment, working with Russian air traffic controllers, receiving weather reports from Russian meteorologists via those same controllers. And by the way, the grim fact that not a single person survived was established on the spot by Russian emergency services and Russian doctors. So no, Russia was not some neutral bystander. It was an active participant in every stage of the events, and this must be investigated, possibly one of the suspects. In such a situation, the natural, obvious, correct step would have been to hand over the investigation of such a high-profile, politically sensitive disaster to an independent international body. Above all, to ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, the main global authority for ensuring aviation safety. But ICAO was not merely left out. It was kept far, far away from the investigation. They weren't even allowed near it. And I emphasize this because a lot of people still misunderstand. ICAO and MAKI are not the same thing. ICAO, that's the United Nations International Civil Aviation Organization. MAC, the Interstate Aviation Committee, is something entirely different. It's basically a Moscow Aviation Committee, a structure created within the framework of the so-called CIS. Back then, the CIS still showed some signs of life. Naturally, its headquarters are in Moscow, its entire staff is in Moscow, its experts are all Moscow-based. This is not a neutral international body. It is a Russian-controlled institution, and yes, for the sake of appearances, for a little window dressing, they brought in a couple of specialists from Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan. But it was crystal clear, Moscow was in charge. And yes, Poland was formally involved in the investigation from the start. We must acknowledge that. Here, you see this woman in the picture? Energetic-looking, determined. She's not just anyone. She was the Polish Minister of Health at the time. And here she is, speaking with her Russian counterpart in Moscow. You might wonder, why is the minister dressed like that? Look closely at the setting. This is a morgue. In a morgue, you wear such protective gear to guard against dangerous infections. And that black plastic bag you see? Yes, exactly what you think. A body bag. And so, smiling politely, fully cooperating, the two sides work together in this way. Alongside the main investigation, the one run entirely by the Moscow Aviation Committee, pretending to be an international body, Poland also set up its own commission. It was led by the then Minister of the Interior, Jerzy Miller. At that time, Miller was 59 years old, no longer young, with a long career behind him, though he had only served as Interior Minister for 2 years. Before that, he'd held a variety of posts in government, none of them connected to law enforcement or security structures. Perhaps that explains his particular delicacy in certain matters. It turned out that Minister Miller had no desire whatsoever to photograph the bodies at the crash site, there, in that forest, where the plane went down. Miller said openly, he and the members of his commission did not try to photograph the remains because they did not consider such photos useful for the investigation. Let that sink in. Photographs of the dead, of the victims, would not be useful for the investigation. I have not seen these photographs. I do not wish to see them, and certainly not to comment on them, said Jerzy Miller. Pause for a moment. Take a few deep breaths. Stop being shocked. And you'll see that in Miller's logic there was a kind of consistency. From the very first minutes, hours, days, and months, the entire investigation was framed as the investigation of an aviation accident, the crash of an aircraft, period. So we study the angle of bank, the pitch angle, the approach speed, the glide slope, the outer marker, the inner marker. This is where we focus. Flaps, slats. We can discuss these endlessly. We'll bring in every possible expert, every decorated pilot of Russia, every first-class test pilot, and they'll all argue for hours about approach angles and roll angles, nose up, nose down, and every possible detail connected to the airplane. The circumstances of human death? Completely uninteresting. What's unclear? The plane crashed, the people died, end of story. And if it's all clear, then why would anyone have this unhealthy, pathological interest in looking at those horrific photos? At torn human bodies? No. Let's talk about bank angles and pitch. Much nicer. And so, following exactly that logic, exactly that narrow focus, exactly 1 month later, The MAK, the Moscow Aviation Committee, presented a report on the preliminary results of the technical investigation. It was signed by none other than Tatiana Anodina, the chair of the MAK, published right there on the official website. This isn't my invention. This is a screenshot from the site itself. And that report became, in my view, the third unique feature of the Smolensk case. We already had two: the unique composition of the victims and the unique circumstances of the crash itself. Now, we had a third, an absolutely unique preliminary report. In just a few paragraphs, literally half a page, they managed to summarize everything important, all the key conclusions. I have to admit something here. I've been a writer for 25 years. I've written hundreds of articles and many books, hundreds of pages long, and never, not once, have I been able to compress so much important and conclusive content into such a tiny space. Let's see what Madame Anodina's masterpiece told us. First, exactly as I'd been saying from the start, now confirmed by expert opinion, there was no failure of the plane's engines, systems, or structure prior to impact. Second, there was no in-flight breakup of the aircraft before it hit any obstacles. Third, the small open fires that did occur were extinguished quickly. There were just a few little pools of kerosene that probably went out on their own on the wet ground, but they were doused anyway. No significant fire damage to the people or the structure. So far, nothing new to us. But then came something remarkable. Anodina stated, clearly and plainly, that the Russian side knew about the disaster before it happened and prepared for it. How, you ask? She wrote, and I quote, "For those who can't read the screen, approximately 13 minutes after the incident, personnel from the Internal Affairs Directorate of the Smolensk region and the Federal Protective Service established a cordon around the crash site with a radius of 500 meters, involving 180 personnel and 16 vehicles." End quote. Let's pause. A radius of 500 meters means a diameter of 1,000 meters. Multiply that by pi, the perimeter's over 3,100 meters. They surrounded a 3-kilometer perimeter with 180 people in just 13 minutes. And that's not 13 minutes after someone called in the crash to the local police. No, from the moment itself, meaning in those 13 minutes, a command was given, received by the duty officer,
какой-то райотдел милиции Смоленска, не после поступления команды на выезд. Нет, вообще вот от момента до, то есть
passed up the chain
команда, ее
to
принял
higher
дежурный,
command,
дежурный оповестил
because a local
начальство.
duty
Просто
officer
дежурный по
can't just
радио
summon
не может передать
180
180
officers.
человек.
The forces
Начальство
were
все
assembled,
организовалось,
transported,
выделил наряд
and
сил,
deployed in a perimeter
180
over
человек
3
прибыли.
kilometers long.
Аэродром не находится посреди города, как вы понимаете. И на периметре в 3142 метра 180 человек милиционеров бегом за 13 минут, у них уже не 13 оставалось, а гораздо меньше стали. Ребята, кто из вас
And anyone here ever seen a
когда-нибудь
Russian
видел
policeman
бегущего
run?
милиционера? Вот я тоже никогда не видел.
I
Вот
haven't.
убегающих ментов,
Maybe some
может
of you
быть,
have
кто-то
seen
и
one
видел.
running away
Кто
from
из вас
something,
видел
but
милиционера
towards
российского,
danger,
советского мента,
towards protecting
который
citizens?
бежит для того, чтобы защитить граждан, защитить правопорядок, бежит, чтобы приступить к выполнению своих обязанностей. Этого кто-нибудь видел?
Number.
Этого не видел никто и никогда. Российский мент не
The
бегает,
Russian
он
cop
даже
doesn't
не
run.
ходит. Он
He
канает.
saunters, belly
Он
out,
канает,
broadcasting
покачивая
his
своим
authority.
пузом и всем видом показывая, кто здесь представитель власти. Поэтому за
So,
13
if they got
минут
180
расставить
men
180
into position in
человек на
under
периметре
13 minutes,
3142
there's only
метра,
one way.
может быть, только
They
в том
were
случае,
already
если эти
there,
люди уже
waiting,
все заранее
which means the
там
Russian side
были.
somehow
Следовательно,
miraculously
российская сторона
knew the
знала,
crash would happen.
удивительным образом знала, что катастрофа произойдет.
And here's where
Далее,
things
те
get
же
even
половинки
more
листа
fascinating. We
госпожа
move from
Анодина
miraculous
подчиненная
preparedness
объясняет,
to the
собственно,
officially
сам
stated cause of
механизм,
the total
сам механизм
fatalities.
катастрофы.
According to the Max preliminary report, that same short half-page gem, the reason every single person died instantly was, and I'm quoting here, the impact on the ground at overloads exceeding 100 grams, 100 G. For those unfamiliar with the concept, we know the speed at which the aircraft was coming in. First, there's the standard tabulated landing speed for a Tu-154 on approach. And second, we have the black boxes. The plane was approaching the ground at 260 kilometers per hour. That's 72 meters per second. If we take the smaller of the two times they themselves give, 5 seconds, not 5.6, then the deceleration from that approach, speed to zero, after the structure started breaking, gives us a load factor of about 1.5 G. You take 72, divide by 5, and then divide by 9.81. That's your approximately 1.5 grams. And so, a very big question arises. Should a Tu-154 really have come apart under such tiny overloads? And then Madame Anodina tells us what supposedly happened to the people. Medico-traceological examinations showed... Stop. What are medico-traceological examinations? We'll clarify exactly what that means in a moment. Here you are. In forensic practice, the objects of medico-traceological examination are traces of damage, imprints, inclusions on the human body, and related analogous traces on clothing, all arising from mechanical action, sharp objects, blunt force, and so on, as well as chemical and thermal effects that cause bodily harm. The questions such an examination answers are whether such traces exist, what kind of traces they are, how and under what conditions they were formed, what kind of injuring instrument caused them, and whether that instrument can be identified. In plain language, this is a detailed inspection of bodies and remains, and of clothing, to catalog injuries and infer what produced them.
На теле, на одежде и предположить, чем они могли быть произведены. То есть судебно-медицинское трассологическое исследование не имеет ничего
It has nothing to
общего
do
с
with flight
изучением
paths, angles, or the aircraft's
движения
kinematics.
самолета. Это вовсе не
It's not about
обсуждение о
trajectories.
траектории.
It's about what
Нет, это
happened to the
осмотр
bodies.
трупов, по-простому сказать.
So, the
Медико-трассологические
medico-traceological
исследования
examinations
показали, что в
showed
момент
that at the
разрушения
moment,
конструкции
the
самолета
aircraft
на
structure was
пассажиров
breaking up,
действовали
the passengers were subjected to overloads on the order of 100 gigahertz 100.
100 же, а не 1,5.
And therefore, survival in this incident was impossible. Thus, in black letters on white paper, we get this. The airplane was breaking up under about 1.5 G, while the bodies were being subjected to approximately 100 G. How can such a thing be?
А тела разрушались с перегрузкой 100 G, под воздействием перегрузки 100 G. Каким образом такое может быть?
In spite of all this, and in spite of these glaring contradictions,
Через
6 months later came the final MAC report, 206 pages long. It repeated the same storyline, and everything about the deaths of the people was compressed into a subordinate clause that the bodies were subjected to deceleration overloads of more than 100 G, more than, this time, not around, but more than 100 G. And a human organism cannot withstand such load. And that was that. They filed the whole matter away. The leaders of Russia, you see them here, renowned for their piety, Dmitry Medvedev and Vladimir Putin, prayed for the souls of the dead and lit candles. At the time of the crash, the Prime Minister of Poland was Donald Tusk. In 2011, a year after the disaster, Poland held new parliamentary elections. In Poland, the government is formed by parliament, a new cabinet is appointed, and Donald Tusk became prime minister again. That was the first case. after the fall of communism, in the Third Republic of Poland, of a prime minister being reappointed for a second term. Tusk continued in office, but in 2014 he decided voluntarily to step down and went on to chair the European Council, becoming a major European political figure. Subsequent elections brought further changes. In 2016, the balance of political forces shifted. Some actors moved to the background. Others came to lead the country. Subsequent elections reshuffled the deck. The political balance inside Poland changed. Some forces moved into the background, and others took the helm. In 2016, 6 years after the crash, 5 years after the MAK had filed its report, and after the Jerzy Miller Polish Commission had issued its own report that, in essence, mirrored the Russian version, Poland set up a subcommittee, modestly titled, yes, a subcommittee. Chaired by Antoni Macierewicz, then Minister of Defense and a veteran of Solidarity. And Macierewicz's team began a new investigation into the circumstances of this tragedy. And then the flow began, a stream of curious, very curious things. This first item, I believe, did not even come directly from the subcommittee. Journalists dug it up. Pay attention to the date, a very interesting date. When I reported this 4 years ago, I didn't even register the symbolism. February 24th. Back then, February 24th was just a date. While the Miller Commission was working, the meeting room, the working office, was equipped with a microphone and a recorder that captured everything the participants said. This was not a secret bug, not a clandestine device. It was openly installed. The recordings existed, they were transcribed, and then classified. But in 2016, journalists pulled it out. Immediately, I emphasize, none of the participants in that 24th of February 2011 meeting, none of the voices on the tape claimed it was fake or doctored. No one said montage. Everyone tacitly acknowledged its authenticity. This material was published widely in the Polish press. One outlet headlined it, "The Transcript of Betrayal." I would phrase it slightly differently. The Transcript of Betrayal and Incompetence. Calendar, February 24th, 2011. 10 months had passed since the catastrophe. And only in the 10th month did it finally dawn on them, the 100G. On the 10th month, it finally clicked. Someone in the room says, "I have a question specifically about that value, over 100 gigabytes." We were talking about the forces acting during the crash, and what exactly will be stated in the report. We did not calculate the forces acting on the bodies from the kinematics. We took that figure from the MAC report, which itself rested on medico-traceological examination. That is, they took it from the Russians, who took it not from instruments or physics, but from injury patterns. The logic is breathtaking. If the bodies are destroyed, the overload must have been huge. That's how they established it, not by instruments, not by calculations, but because everyone was very dead and badly mutilated. Therefore, the G-load was enormous. We keep reading from the meeting transcript. And the thing is, says one voice, that based on the technical annex, on our calculations, Polish calculations by the Miller Commission, our conclusions show this was a low-energy event. The speed at which the aircraft contacted the ground was approximately the same as the touchdown speed in a normal landing. Absolutely right, another person replies. Won't we be accused, someone asks, of the fact that in one description we're calling it a low-energy event, while in another we're writing 100G, a new voice chimes in. Based on the types of injuries established, the bodies were subjected to overloads. When we analyze the passengers' bodies, we see from 100 grams up to 350 grams, because there was complete fragmentation of bodies. In other words, not just corpses, fragments of corpses. Then the chairman, Jersey Miller, himself speaks. May I have the speed of the aircraft at the moment of impact? Answer: about 270 kilometers per hour. And the collision with the ground occurred at around 260 kilometers per hour. Miller again: good. And where did it come to a stop? Answer: 80 meters. Miller: all right, I'll now compute the acceleration. When I first read this, I was stunned. Then I checked his year of birth. The man was 59. Older than me, even. A person of that generation, who learned to read, to write by hand, to do mental math, to calculate on paper. He starts right there in the meeting. In month 10 of the expert commission's work, feverishly computing the deceleration. Then begins the little farce. 260, 260. Someone prompts him, no, convert to meters per second. He converts, they get some numbers. No, that's a dimensionless load factor. You must divide by 9.81. Someone, the voices aren't always identified, finally says, agreed. Since 1 gram equals 9.81 meters per second squared, unfortunately. And here, possibly Miller himself. Unfortunately, that gives us only about 10 grams, not 100. After which a clearly identified Miller says, in summary, all right, in short, we have to sort out this 100G, because otherwise it's impossible. At the very least, we must construct a kinematic model here that will be close to 100G. Otherwise, we cannot risk making such a statement. End quote. So, the Miller Commission, the Polish government commission under Donald Tusk's cabinet, understood perfectly well what the physics implied, and they exerted extraordinary intellectual effort to somehow crossbreed an elephant with a hedgehog, to shoehorn 100G into their report, even though their back-of-the-envelope math, done in the 10th month, flatly contradicted it. Now we, you and I, remember a bit more of 7th grade physics, so let's remind ourselves. Kinematics, uniformly accelerated motion. The simplest formulas. Acceleration is the rate of change of velocity. A equals delta V over delta T, A equals delta V over delta T. Units, meters per second per second. If over 2 seconds a body's speed increases by 20 meters per second, from 10 to 30, then 20 divided by 2 equals 10. The acceleration is 10 meter per second. Meter per second, 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 meter. Because we live on Earth, we often express acceleration not in meters per second squared, but in multiples of g, where g equals 9.81 meters per second squared. So a load factor of 5G means about 49 meters per second squared. 5 times 9.81 is approximately 495 times 9.81 is approximately 49. Convenient sometimes. Let's plug in their own numbers. Stopping distance 80 meters, initial speed 260 kilometers per hour, which is 72 meters per second. Pause the video, take a calculator. I'm not making this up. Under a uniform deceleration model, the time to stop is just over 2 seconds, 2.22 seconds, and the load factor comes out around 3.31 G, a bit over 3. For a completely concrete example, exactly what they were calculating there. Stopping distance 80 meters. speed
скорость
260 kilometers
260
per hour.
метров в
Sorry,
километр в
that's
час, согласен,
72 meters per
362 метра в
second.
секунду. Дальше
Then you
подставляете,
just plug it in
можете
and
прямо
compute.
сейчас проверить
You can
с
pause right
калькулятора,
now and
нажав
check it on a
на паузу. Я
calculator.
здесь нигде не
I
ошибся.
haven't made a mistake
Время,
anywhere. The
время
time, the
торможения
stopping
2
time, is
секунды,
2 seconds, 2.22 seconds, a little over 2
чуть
seconds.
больше 2
And the load
секунды.
factor was
При этом перегрузка была
3.31,
3,31. Чуть
a bit
больше
over 3
3
units.
единиц. Если
If you multiply that by 10, you get
физический предмет,
33 meters per second
например,
per
самолет,
second.
имела скорость начальную 72 метра в секунду, затем эта скорость упала до нуля, тело остановилось. Произошло это на дистанции 80 метров, время дистанции торможения, тормозной путь, то это значит, что продолжался этот процесс чуть больше 2 секунд, и при этом была перегрузка 3,3 единицы. Если это умножить на 10, то получится 3 метра в секунду за секунду. Да,
Yes,
это
all of
все
this is under the assumption of uniform
применительно к
deceleration.
равно ускоренному движению.
In
Время
reality, it was
становилось,
likely
скорее
not
всего, было
uniform.
неравно ускорено. В
Higher at
начале
the start,
перегрузки было
lower
больше,
later,
потом они были меньше.
which
Это
gives some
дает
deviations. Yes, tens of percent.
некоторые отклонения, некоторые на десятки процентов, но,
But as you
как вы
understand, here
понимаете,
it
в данном
doesn't
случае
matter at
совершенно
all.
не важно. Ну, пусть
Whether
оно
it was
было не
5 or 3 or
3,31, а в
2 or
начале
6,
5,
it is certainly
а
not
на
100,
вторую
and
секунду
even
оно
less
было 2.
munudavde.
Это все уже абсолютно не важно, потому что 5, что 3, что 2, что 6, это совершенно не 100, и уж тем более не 300. И уж тем более не 300.
As for
По
the 80
поводу 80
meters,
метров они не
they didn't
ошиблись.
make a
Да,
mistake
действительно,
there.
есть борозда.
Yes, there is a
Фотограф эту
furrow in
борозду
the ground by
пропахал
this photo,
стабилизатор, ну, то есть
plowed by the
горизонтальное оперение
stabilizer, that is, the
самолета.
horizontal tail.
Плюс-минус.
Plus
Все
minus,
сейчас
sure. It's
понятно,
difficult
что
to be
и
perfectly
дистанция
exact
тут
here,
достаточно сложно, как
where
считать.
exactly it ended, but we don't need precision in
Достаточно
this
сложно
case.
сказать, здесь закончилось, вот там в какой именно точке закончилось, но
We
нам не
need the
нужна в
order of
данном случае
magnitude,
точность. Нам нужен
and that
порядок
is
величин, он
perfectly
совершенно
clear.
понятен. Он совершенно понятен.
The
Ускорение
acceleration
в
is 30 times
30 раз
smaller than
меньше,
Anodina said,
чем говорила
or
Анодина,
100 times
или
smaller
100
than what
раз
those
меньше, чем показало на
medico-traceological
самом-то деле
conclusions
медико
implied with their
социологическое
300.
исходить из 300.
And
И
most
самое
importantly,
главное,
an overload of
ускорение
3.3 or 4 units or 5 units over 2 seconds
единиц на протяжении 2 секунд
is
это ни
nothing
о чем.
from the standpoint of
С
the
точки
impact on
зрения
a person.
воздействия на человека
Nothing
это
at all.
совершенно ни о чем.
One more
Напоминаю,
reminder, a human being is a very
воздушный
tough
бой.
creature. Air
На
combat in
самолетах
World War II
истребителей
fighters
эпохи
was flown at
холодной
around
войны
4G.
велся примерно на перегрузках около 4, чуть больше или чуть меньше 4. Под
A little
воздействием
more, a
этой
little less.
перегрузки летчик в
Under
течение
4G for
нескольких
several minutes,
минут,
not
ну,
seconds,
секунд,
minutes.
бой-то
A pilot
продолжался
didn't just
несколько
remain
минут.
alive, he
Ну,
worked,
время полного
flew the
заработка
airplane,
самолета истребителей
operated
эпохи
weapons,
примерно 30
aimed,
секунд. Только
watched
один
his
вираж не надо
instruments
полный
so as not to hit the ground,
в течение
kept
нескольких
scanning the
минут
sky
он
so he
просто
wouldn't be shot
оставался
down.
жив. Он и
A
работал.
tremendously
Он
difficult
управлял
physical and
самолетом,
mental
он
task,
управлял
and
оружием,
nobody was
он
dying from
прицеливался,
G
он следил
forces.
за приборами, чтобы в землю не врезался, он смотрел по сторонам, чтобы его не сбили и так далее. То есть человек выполнял невероятно сложную физически, психически сложную, психологически сложную задачу, при этом ускорении никто от этого совершенно не умирал.
After World War II came jet aircraft, and performance rose. Wing loading and maneuvering capability grew first to about half of that, then more. And by the fourth generation, you could pull up to 8G.
Потом больше половинки, потом уже тяга вооруженность единицы бывает у истребителя 4-го поколения. Там уже можно было крутиться с перегрузками до 8 единиц.
Which
Но
is
это
already
уже
hard,
сложновато. Это уже очень даже сложновато.
especially when the load acts head to foot. The blood in your head becomes 8 times heavier, the cardiovascular system can't keep up, blood drains into the legs.
Сосуды не справляются, сердечно-сосудистая система не справляется. А с этим и кровь утекает, и кровь уходит из головы в ноги, и начинается кислородное
The brain gets
голодание, человек
oxygen
теряет
starved,
сознание,
and a person
кислородное
blacks
голодание
out,
мозга, а
G-lock.
человек теряет сознание.
Hence the
Называется
anti-G
очень
suit that
черный
painfully
на
squeezes the
языке
legs so
летчиков,
blood
поэтому
doesn't pool
придуман
there.
противоперегрузочный
It's rough,
костюм,
but even
который
then,
мучительно
people don't die
сжимает
from the
ноги
G's
человеку,
themselves.
чтобы кровь туда не оттекала. Ну, в общем, это уже тяжело, это сильно тяжело, но никто не умирает. Никто не умирает.
And Gagarin, on re-entry, experienced around 12G. 12. It's well known from his own account that the instrument readouts began to blur before his eyes. On the audio, you can hear it. His voice changes for about a minute. Then, the G's dropped, and Gagarin returned alive. So,
То есть
dozens of seconds at
перегрузка
8G,
в
that's
течение
already very hard.
десятков секунд до
Several
8
minutes at
это уже
4G,
тяжело, это сильно тяжело.
entirely
Перегрузка
normal for a
4
healthy,
для здорового
trained person.
тренированного человека на протяжении нескольких минут абсолютно нормально.
And
Еще
back to
раз
our calculation.
возвращаемся к результату нашего расчета. В
For a bit
течение
over 2
чуть
seconds, the
более
load was
2
about
секунд
3.31 grams,
перегрузка
or if you like,
3,31,
maybe
или
higher
еще
at the
раз,
start,
может быть, на
lower toward
начальном
the
этапе
end,
она
say
была
4, then
больше,
2.
может быть 4, может быть 5 единиц.
For the
Молодые
young and
здоровые,
healthy
которые
on board,
находились на борту
the
этого
protection
самолета,
detail
ну, в
officers, the
частности, офицеры
pilots, the
охраны,
crew, the
летчики,
flight
экипаж,
attendants,
стюардессы,
that
вообще
should have
ничего не
meant
должны были
nothing
за эти 2
beyond
минуты
discomfort.
испытать, ну, кроме некого дискомфорта. Ну,
Yes,
там
there
были
were elderly
старенькие
gentlemen on board,
дедушки, там были старые дедушки, там были ветераны польской полиции,
veterans of
ветераны
Polish politics,
солидарности, да,
veterans
старый
of
дедушка.
solidarity.
2
2
секунды
seconds of that
такого
could bring on a
воздействия
faint,
ни
heart
к
trouble,
чему, ни к
a
чему
hypertensive
может
episode.
случиться
You'd have
потеря
to carry
сознания,
Grandpa off the airplane, fetch a doctor,
какие-то
give
проблемы,
injections, bring him
гипертонический
around,
криз, то есть
and
дедушку
that's
надо
all.
будет из самолета
So what are
выносить,
these fragments of
бежать за
bodies?
врачом,
What
уколы какие-то
fragments?
делать, приводить дедушку в сознание. Ну вот, собственно, и все. Вот, собственно, и все, что могло случиться с самолетом, который уменьшил свою скорость с 72 метров в секунду до нуля на дистанции 80 метров. Какие фрагменты тел? Какие фрагменты тел?
Let's ask it
Зададим
differently.
вопрос по-другому. По-другому.
What
А
is 100
что же?
grams?
Не будем за 300. Что
Let's not even
такое
touch
100
300.
же? Ну,
100
100 же это
Gc
980,
is an
это ускорение
acceleration of
981
981
метров в
meters per
секунду.
second squared.
Если при
If,
таком
at such an
ускорении
acceleration,
самолет
the
потерял
aircraft shed
скорость
its speed
72
from 72
миллисекунд
meters
до
per
нуля,
second to zero,
это
the stopping distance is 2.64 meters.
дистанция
The duration is
торможения
75
2
milliseconds.
метра
A human blink
64
averages
сантиметра.
250
Продолжительность
milliseconds.
процесса
Even a quick one is around
75
100 milliseconds.
миллисекунд. А человек моргает в среднем 250 миллисекунд. В среднем разные люди моргают по-разному, при разном физическом состоянии, от 100 до 400 миллисекунд.
So,
То есть
75
торможение за
milliseconds
75
is faster than a
миллисекунд это
quick
быстрее,
blink.
чем быстрое моргание.
To human
То есть
perception,
в
that's
человеческом восприятии это
instantaneous.
мгновенно. То
Meaning,
есть перегрузка
100
100
grams
же,
here would be
есть
practically an
начальная скорость,
instant
да, еще
stop
раз повторяю,
in
79 секунд, то есть 200 км в час.
0.075 seconds,
Это
with a stop
практически,
path of
в
2.64
нашем
meters.
восприятии мгновенная остановка за 72 миллисекунды с тормозным путем 2 метра 64 сантиметра. Как
How do you
такое
realize
можно
that physically?
реализовать? Ну
I've
вот
drawn
я
it for
всё
you.
нарисовал, что ж непонятно.
This
Это
is a
удар
head-on hit into a vertical wall of
вертикальную
nearly infinite
стенку
stiffness.
бесконечно большой жесткости.
There's
Ну,
no
бесконечно
true
большой жесткости
infinite
вроде не
in
бывает. Ну,
nature,
допустим, это
but
гранитная
suppose it's a
скала.
granite cliff
Гранитная скала.
and the airplane
И
hits it
самолет
perfectly
вот
perpendicular,
именно вот так
or a
припрется
building
строго
very strong
перпендикулярно в эту
that suffers
скалу
no appreciable
воткнулся. Или,
deformation.
например, здание, очень прочное, припрочное, могучее здание, которое не испытало никаких сколь-нибудь заметной деформации при этом ударе.
All the
А
deformation happens
деформируется
in the
только
airframe.
самолет. Вот в
Then,
этом
yes,
случае
near
вполне
instant
можно
stop.
себе представить эту ситуацию практически мгновенной остановки.
The
Фюзеляж
fuselage
начинает
concertinas
складываться
and those in the front
гармошкой.
rows
Начинает складываться гармошкой. И люди, которые сидели в первых рядах кресла, да, у них действительно тормозной путь вполне может так.
may
Вполне
indeed
может
have a
быть именно
stopping
таким
path of about 2.6 meters.
2,64 метра.
Things
Да, с
would be
этим
very
несчастным
bad
все
for them.
будет очень плохо.
Those in the
Заметим, те,
tail
кто
have a
сидит в
longer
хвосте, там
crush
будет ситуация
distance,
другая. Он начинает
therefore
складываться
less
гармошкой.
G.
Фюзеляж выполняет функцию амортизатора. Арифметически, я даже могу сказать слово математически, арифметически это выражается в том, что дистанция, которую пройдет человечек, переместится человечек, который сидел в последнем ряду кресла, будет гораздо больше. Дистанция будет, тормозной путь будет гораздо больше, соответственно, перегрузки-то у него еще будут меньше. Но все это, как
But
вы
none of
понимаете,
this
имеет
has
ни
the
малейшего
slightest
отношения к
relation to
нашему
our
случаю,
case,
потому что самолет
because President
президента Kaczyński
Kaczynski's
не
aircraft
врезался
did
в
not fly
вертикальную
into a
гранитную
vertical
стенку
granite wall
бесконечной
of
жесткости.
infinite
Во
stiffness.
что он врезался? Во
What
что
did
он
it hit?
врезался? Показываю,
I'll show you.
показываю, причем
And note the
смотрите
source,
откуда.
the
Это
Mackey report
Межгосударственный
itself.
авиационный комитет. Это
There's a
маковский
train
отчет,
diagram of the
официальный
accident area.
маковский российский отчет, госпожи Анодиной подписано, и вот к нему было приложено вот этот рельеф местности. Видите, там рельеф местности в районе авиационного происшествия.
Look
Присмотритесь к
closely.
нему внимательно. Если
The main
вы
fragments and
наполоните,
wreckage
я
lie
вам
on a
всё
flat,
расскажу.
smooth, horizontal surface.
Местоположение
The so-called
основных
slope of the
фрагментов и
ravine,
обломков
the
это
thing it
просто
supposedly hit,
ровная, гладкая, горизонтальная поверхность. А так называемый склон оврага, в который он врезался, это вот этот небольшой участок
is a short
с
stretch with a
углом
rise of
подъема
7
7
degrees.
градусов. Причем,
Also
заметьте,
note,
основные осколки
the main
вообще
wreckage
легли
fell
на
on the
ровной
flat.
поверхности, ну,
Let's
допустим,
say
не
the
видно были
breakup began
предыдущие.
on that very
Разрушаться
shallow
он
slope.
начал вот на этом участке очень пологого склона. Далее
I've
уже то, что
redrawn
я
this
вам
honestly.
нарисовал, все это
You can
нарисовано
scale and check.
по-честному. Можете увеличить, приложите транспортир, проверьте.
The slope
Склон
rises at 7
поднимается
degrees.
под углом
In the
7
last
градусов.
seconds, while the instruments still
Самолет
worked,
в последние
the airplane
секунды,
had a
пока еще
positive
работали
vertical
приборы,
speed of
4,8
4.8 meters per
метра в
second.
секунду
It was
вертикальная,
climbing, not descending,
вертикальная, то есть вверх
with
направо.
plus 3 degree
Вертикальная
pitch.
положительная скорость, положительная. Самолет не снижался, самолет поднимался. Он поднимался с углом тангажа 3 градуса.
If the
Если бы
ground had been
земля тут
perfectly
была
flat,
совершенно
it
ровная,
would
он
have
бы
just
просто
climbed away,
поднялся.
and
Но
we
нам
wouldn't
бы
be having
нечем
this
было бы
conversation.
говорить, но земля тут
But the ground
неровная,
isn't perfectly
тут
flat.
действительно
There's a
склон
small
оврага
slope,
очень небольшой
7
по
degrees. The
протяженности,
trajectory is
но
about
все-таки
plus 3
склон.
degrees.
У него наклон 7, а угол тангажа 3, угол траектории 3. И он
So it scraped
чиркнул
the slope.
этот
Then,
самолет,
after a very short
чиркнул
run,
по склону.
most of the debris lies on the
Дальше,
flat.
ну, склон очень
That's why the
небольшой
overloads
длины,
are
и
so
дальше, еще раз
small,
повторяю,
wrapping up
большая
this
часть
whole
разброса
physics and G-loads
обломков уже
part.
просто на совершенно ровном участке местности. Вот поэтому и такие ничтожные перегрузки. Вот поэтому и такие ничтожные перегрузки. Завершая этот физический перегрузочный момент, отметим, что вообще говоря,
Human beings
человек
are very resilient.
это очень живучее существо. Вот
Here you
приводная
have a table
таблица
of maximum
максимальных
G-loads
перегрузок, которые
survived by
испытывала
people,
выжившие,
specifically
оставшиеся
Formula
живыми
One
после
drivers.
этой аварии, так называемые пилоты, то есть водители Формулы-1, гонщики Формулы-1.
Notice,
Обратите внимание,
there are
тут
two
два
cases in
товарища,
2021
события
to
21-25 года,
2025
два гонщика,
where
который
drivers
выжил
survived
без
without
травм,
injuries
выжил
or with only
незначительные
minor
повреждения. То
injuries
есть очень
after
короткая,
very
очень
short duration
кратковременная
spikes of
перегрузка,
40G
40
and 50G.
единиц, 50
This
единиц.
shows that a
Далеко
very
еще
short
не факт, что
needle-like
человека
overload
убивает.
in the tens of
Так что
grams
даже
does not
если,
automatically
даже
kill.
если предположить,
So
вот
even if,
непонятно,
for reasons
совершенно
entirely
непонятной
unclear here,
причине
there were such a
там
momentary
возникли
spike on the
перегрузки
order of
100 G
75 milliseconds, as implied by 100
протяженностью
grams at
73
these
миль в
speeds, it is still
секунду,
a big question whether
еще большой
everyone would have
вопрос,
died.
большой
Some might have
вопрос.
survived, and that goes straight
Остались
to
бы
the
после
core of
этого
the zero survivors
живые люди
oddity.
или бы все погибли.
Our whole
Разговоры о
talk about
перегрузках
G-loads and that
и
meeting transcript where
выявившиеся
they were
протоколы
straining to force the
заседаний,
Russian
когда
numbers
они
into their own
усиленно
report,
пытались подогнать не подгоняющуюся, не впихиваемую реальность под российский отчет, это
that's
только
just a small
маленькая часть,
part of
только
what
маленькая
started
часть того,
surfacing
что началось
once the Masierowicz
после того, когда в
subcommittee
2016
got to
году
work
начала
in
работать комиссия
2016.
Мацаревича. А
After
дальше
that,
начались
we
такие
began to see
вещи,
things that were either
которые
pitch black
то ли
humor or a horror
супер черный
film.
юмор, кстати, нечеловеческий юмор, или фильм ужасов. В
In the coffin
гробу
of President
Леха
Lech Kaczyński,
Kaczyńskiego
fragments
нашли
from the bodies
фрагменты
of two
тел
other people were
двух
found.
других людей.
I
Это не
repeat once again, this is
вырвание,
not a morbid
это
joke, not
реальность.
an exaggeration. This is
Это
a
реальность.
documented fact, recorded officially. And
После
after
таких
such miracles,
чудес
the
они
Polish
решили
authorities
провести
decided to begin
массовую
mass
эксгумацию.
exhumations. But this
Но
is
тем не
not
менее,
as simple as it
сделать
may
это очень
sound.
сложно,
Poland
потому
is a
что
democratic state
Польша
and a
это
deeply Catholic country.
странное такое сочетание демократическое, но при этом весьма религиозная католическая страна. То
You
есть провести
cannot, in
эксгумацию
Stalinist fashion, simply come with shovels, dig up graves without permission, and tell relatives
В
nothing.
демократической
In
стране
a
так нельзя.
democracy,
Нужно
you must
получить
get formal
разрешение
consent
ближайших
from the
родственников на
closest
эксгумацию.
relatives to
Ставить
open a
на
grave. And in a Catholic
Католическая
family,
семья
to disturb a
такие вещи
grave
не
is an
понимает.
extremely serious matter,
Поэтому далеко
not
не
taken
все,
lightly.
далеко не все
Many
согласились на
families
эти
refused
процедуры.
consent,
Но тем
and
не
that is
менее, по
completely
состоянию на
understandable.
июнь 2017 года
Nevertheless, by
было
June
эксгумировано
2017,
24 захоронения.
24 burials had been opened. And then,
Дальше
this
вцепитесь
is beyond
двумя
anything.
руками в стул. Было установлено, что
In
в
12 out of those
12
24
гробах из
coffins,
24
they found
присутствуют
remains belonging
тела
to other
других
people.
людей
Not
или
just
даже
wrong
сочетание
name on the
фрагментов
coffin, but
множества
mixed
лиц.
remains.
В
Fragments
частности, в
from
гробу
several different
генерала
people
такого-то,
placed
не буду
together.
называть никаких фамилий, нашли
Example,
только верхнюю
in the
часть
coffin
его,
of one general,
а нижнюю
I will
от
not name him
другого
now,
человека.
they found only
Со
the
стороны
upper half
военной
of his
судьбы
body,
тоже генерал.
and the lower
В
half
гробу
belonged to
генерала
another
третьего
man,
по счету
who by an
обнаружили
irony of fate
14
was also a general.
фрагментов 7
In another
разных
coffin
лиц.
of a third general,
От 7 разных
they found
людей.
14 separate fragments
В
belonging
гробу
to 7 different people.
бортпроводницы, не называю
In the coffin of
фамилии,
a flight attendant,
обнаружили
they found
фрагменты
remains from
тел
5
5
people,
человек,
including internal organs
включая
that could
внутренние
not
органы
possibly be
от
hers.
другого человека. В
According to
целом,
the
по
Polish
информации
prosecutor's
польской
office,
прокуратуры,
as of
по
June
состоянию
2017, they had
2017 года
identified
было
69 human
обнаружено
fragments
69
belonging to
человеческих
26
фрагментов,
individuals found in
принадлежащих
12 of the
26
24
разным
opened
лицам,
coffins. That is,
находившихся в 12
half of those
гробах
opened graves
из
contained
24
mixed
скелетов.
remains.
Комментировать
There's
это просто
nothing to comment
невозможно.
here, just silence.
Нечего
So,
комментировать.
moving
Просто
forward.
идем дальше. Идем дальше. Комиссия
Unlike Jersey
Мацаревича,
Miller,
в
who,
отличие от
out of
Ежи
some
Миллера,
strange
который в
delicacy,
силу своей
decided not to
душевной
photograph the
ранености
bodies,
не
not to
хотел ни
examine them,
фотографировать останки тел, не разглядывать их,
and in
вообще не
general
понимал,
didn't
зачем
understand
это
why it
надо
was
делать,
even
а
necessary,
решила
the
все-таки
Macherowicz
поглядеть.
subcommittee decided to look
Вот
very
это
carefully.
отчет комиссии, промежуточный отчет комиссии Мацаревича
Before
18
you is
года,
their
он был выполнен на двух
2018
языках,
interim
польском и
report,
английском. Это
published
было
in
удобно
2
работать с
languages,
английским.
Polish and
Все
English.
находившиеся внутри
I personally
самолета
found it easier
люди,
to work with the English version. According to this report,
оказались
every
вне,
single person who had been inside the aircraft ended up outside the fuselage,
вместе со своими
together with their
сиденьями,
seat, torn
а
out pieces
также
of flooring, and
включая
thermal
фрагменты
insulation.
напольного покрытия с теплоизоляцией.
Some human fragments were found on the ground earlier, before fragments of the airplane's structure appeared there. In plain language, the plane hadn't even completely broken up yet, hadn't fully hit the ground, and people had already turned into fragments lying outside. Here's a diagram. Each color marks people from different sections of the passenger cabin. The red dots are from the presidential salon, the forward, more comfortable compartment. Look, these red dots are scattered over a long distance, and in some places are even ahead of the green dots in the direction of flight, meaning ahead of people who sat further forward. How is that even possible? And here's another detail. Strictly speaking, one body was found inside the fuselage, or rather jammed into it. This body was thrown backwards into the rear wall of the lavatory at the very tail of the plane, with such force that the aluminum partition bent and wrapped around it. And remember, this body was moving opposite the plane's direction of motion. We all know, when a car brakes sharply, passengers are thrown forward. And here we're told there was extreme braking. Yet one person somehow flew backwards, with such force that the aluminum wall hugged his body. What could cause that? And here, take a look. This is the door of the presidential salon. Aircraft doors are incredibly strong structures. They lock so firmly because at altitude, the cabin pressure is much higher than outside, and any failure could cause an explosive decompression. A door is designed to withstand enormous loads. This door was torn completely out of its frame and driven into the ground, nose first, like a spear, as you see in the photograph.
Разгерметизация, падение давления, так называемая декомпрессия, это и для людей может быть смертельно, и разрушительно для конструкции. Это очень все серьезно и прочно сделано.
For it to embed itself like that, it needed a huge acceleration vector straight downward, enormous vertical force.
Для того, чтобы закопаться в землю, надо иметь огромное ускорение, направленное вертикально вниз.
Where
откуда
could such a vertical
в
impulse
двери,
come from in a
у
plane
двери,
that
которая
was
является частью
supposedly
самолета.
just
Второй самолет
sliding to a
скользит по
landing,
пологому склону,
breaking
и при
apart
этом тормозит.
gradually
Откуда
while
взялась
decelerating?
мощнейшая
Where did
сила,
such a massive
направленная
downward shove
вертикально
come from?
вниз?
That is a very
Очень
interesting
интересно.
question. And here,
Обнаружились
take a look.
куски
Fragments
конструкции,
of bodies
безусловно,
were found high
принадлежащие
up in the
самолету.
trees,
Это не
not just
мальчишеские
light
границы,
debris like
которые
insulation or
висели на
paper,
деревьях
which could be blown
до
upward by
самой
some airflow.
знаменитой
No,
знаменитой
heavy
смоленской
fragments
березы,
of
которая
human
якобы
bodies.
перерезала, контакт с которой якобы перерезал крыло Ту-154.
By the way, about the
Кстати, по поводу
birch,
березы.
they
С
figured that
березой
out
тоже
too.
все разобрались.
The birch
Береза
was cut,
перерезана,
chopped, severed at a height of
отрублена
5.5 meters.
на высоте 5,5 метров.
Not
Не
55, no.
55,
There wasn't a sequoia
не
growing there. It was a
55, там не
scraggly
секвойя
birch.
росла. Там росла чахлая береза. И
And
на
at a height
высоте
of
5,5
5.5
метров
meters, its
ее
trunk was
прорубило
supposedly
крыло.
severed by the
Мы
wing.
не знаем,
Number
она
we don't know,
обломана.
it's broken.
Ну,
The traditional
традиционная версия,
version,
версия Мака,
Mac's
версия,
version, the
поддержанная
version
комиссией
supported by
Миллера,
the
в том,
Miller
что
Commission,
самолет летел,
is that the airplane was flying horizontally, hit this notorious
ударился об
birch
эту
tree.
самую знаменитую березу.
The birch snapped,
Береза
a
отломалась,
piece of the wing was torn off,
оторвался кусок,
and after that the
кончился
roll
крен.
began. But
Просто
if we
берем,
simply draw it,
рисуем, вот самолет,
here's the
154, вот
2154
на
in scale,
масштабе.
here's the
Вот
birch.
рисуем эту
We measure
березу, отмеряем
5.5 meters.
5,5 метров, и мы видим,
We see
что
that it
он
could
не
not have
мог
rolled
после
over after
этого
that,
повернуться.
and yet it ended up
Там
lying
лежит
upside
на
down on
земле
the
в
ground.
перевернутом виде.
Something
Подчеркнуто с самого
emphasized
начала,
from the
с
very
привода
beginning
до
in
ночи.
Anadina's first report.
Он не
It
мог
could not have rolled
повернуться,
over
если
if
он
it
начал
began rolling while
переворачиваться,
only
находясь на высоте
5.5
5,5
meters above the
метров.
ground.
Он
The
бы уперся
remaining wing would
крылом
have struck the ground,
остатком
and that would have
крыла в
been the end of
землю, и
it.
все, и
It would
не
never have
перевернулся бы
completed the
дальше.
roll.
Для того, чтобы
For
это
that to
событие
happen,
могло
the
произойти, оно
situation
должно
must have been like
происходить вот
this.
так.
The plane
Самолет
approached this
подошел к этой
ill-fated birch
злополучной
already
березе,
with a
уже
huge
имея
roll angle,
огромный крен,
origin unknown.
неизвестно почему взявшийся. И вот в этом вот положении уже почти
And in that
полностью
position, already
опрокинувшийся,
nearly completely
кончиком крыла
inverted,
зацепил
it clipped the
за
birch with the
березу,
wingtip,
обрубил
chopped it
ее и
off, and
дальше
continued
продолжил
rotating
свое
until it
вращение
finally hit the
вокруг
ground
оси,
upside
довернулся
down.
окончательно и рухнул крышей на землю.
Does
Если
that birch
вообще эта
tree even have
береза имеет
anything to
какое-то
do with the
отношение,
plane?
ее обломок имеет отношение к самолету.
Big
Большой вопрос.
question.
Но тут
And then the
непонятно,
question arises.
что
If
же тогда
not,
заставило
then what
самолет
caused the
выписывать
aircraft
такие
to perform such
удивительные
extraordinary
фигуры
maneuvers?
и
To roll at an
описать
angular
бочку с
velocity
такой
faster than
угловой
even an
крена,
F-16
которая
is
недоступна
capable of?
даже F-16. Комиссия
The Makirevich Commission
обнаружила
also
еще
found some other
некоторые
things,
вещи для меня
not obvious to me
неочевидные, но
personally, but I
я
must
должен
report them
вам
to
об
you.
них доложить.
They
Они
discovered
обнаружили такие
strange
странные
bent-back skin
отогнутые
panels,
элементы
which in their
обшивки,
view
которые,
indicate
по
an
мнению,
explosion
говорят о взрыве,
and the impact of a
ударе
blast
взрывной
wave from
волны
inside.
изнутри. Но здесь уже
And
вообще-то
here it's
даже
even hard to
спорить
argue.
становится трудно.
This
Вот
piece
эта
of
обшивка,
skin,
которая была
which had been
прикреплена
riveted
к
to the
стрингерам,
stringers, was not
ее
just
аж
bent
прямо
back at 90
не то,
degrees,
что даже не на
but at a
90,
full
а на все
180
180
degrees by
градусов
some unknown
какая-то
force.
непонятная сила отогнула. Что
What
и
could have
могло
bent it like
отогнуться,
that,
если не
if not an
ударная
internal blast wave?
волна
I don't know.
изнутри, не
That's
знаю, не
explosives
знаю.
work.
Это взрывотехника. Взрывотехника.
Blast physics.
Результат.
One of our
Результат.
viewers,
Один
someone I
из
personally know,
зрителей,
lives in
я
America.
его лично знаю, он живет в Америке, и как
And like
всякий
any American,
американец,
once even
однажды даже
served as a juror in court.
был тем самым присяжным в суде.
He said to me,
«Чё ты так столько
"You've said so
наговорил
much,
всего?» —
so
сказал.
much.
«Зачем столько?»
Why so much?
Одной десятой
Even
того, что
1/10
ты
of what
уже
you said
наговорил, мне было
would have been enough
достаточно,
for me
потому
as
что
a
если
juror
я
to
был
say
бы
guilty.
присяжным, я сказал,
Guilty of
виновен.
what?
Кто виновен?
Guilty of falsifying the
Комиссия
expert
МАКа
examination.
виновна в фальсификации экспертизы. Ну,
It's
понятно, что то,
obvious
что
that
они
what they wrote
написали,
has
не имеет
nothing to
ничего
do with what
общего
actually
с тем, что
happened.
произошло на самом деле.
Falsifying
Фальсификация
an expert
экспертизы — это
examination is a
уголовное
criminal
преступление.
offense,
Этого достаточно.
and that
Что
alone
там
is
было с
enough.
самолетом, об
As
этом
for what
еще можно
exactly happened
гадать.
to the aircraft, we can
Но
still
то,
speculate.
что все, кто участвовал в
But
этом
that
расследовании,
everyone
преступники,
involved
это
in that
просто видно и
investigation
любой
is a
для себя и
criminal.
любому.
That would be
Народному
clear to
заседателю,
any
присяжному
juror.
поверенному, это было присяжному в суде, это должно было быть понятно. Однако,
However,
однако,
in 2018, Macherevich's commission published this report, and
и
nothing.
ничего.
Independent investigations.
Неизвестный человек, фланкер,
Yes,
псевдоним выпустил
some unknown
досье.
person under the
Подробный
pseudonym
отчет, собственно говоря,
Flanker
по
in
большей
Russia
части я его и
published a
пересказываю.
very detailed report. Frankly, I'm basically retelling it now, roughly at the same time, in 2018 to 2019. It was published, and again, nothing. I've recorded several videos, millions of views, and nothing. Why? Because all arguments of reason, any calculations, any physics, any formulas, any photos, any outrageous facts, they're simply washed away like by a tsunami, leaving nothing behind but a smooth, clean surface. All of it is swept away by one unshakable argument. Why would Putin need it? Why would Putin need it? Nobody would undertake such an incredibly complex operation without a reason. First, why would it be needed at all? Second, how could such a thing even be possible? Well, let's look at the screen. This is not something I'm making up. I'm reading this from my own Facebook feed, July 30th, 2025. The war started by Putin has been going on for the fourth year. For 4 years now, people have been killed. Not 96, but far more than 96,000. And here's what a person writes to me. Would the leaders of democratic EU countries cover up the political assassination of a legitimate president and then sit at the same table with the murderer? Could anyone even for a second believe in such a thing? This is what a good man writes to me on July 30th, 2025. Thus, the sheer monstrosity of this crime, its monstrous cynicism and cruelty, has itself become the main shield, the main defense that protected the perpetrators. That was the end of it. Machirovich's commission wrote its report. Fine, it lay there. But it didn't lie there long. On December 13, 2023, as a result of free democratic elections in Poland, the composition of the parliament changed once again, and a new government appeared. And for the first time in Polish history, Donald Tusk became head of government for the third time. On December 13, 2023, Donald Tusk again became Prime Minister of Poland on the third day of his premiership, December 15, 2023, without even waiting a week. On the third day, the Macierewicz subcommittee was dissolved, and a new commission was created under the Prosecutor's Office of Poland. Its mandate, to investigate the activities and abuses of Macierewicz's commission. As of November 18, 2024, the Prosecutor's Office had received 41 reports from this new commission reviewing the subcommittee's work. On the basis of these 41 reports, the Prosecutor's Office issued 6 prosecutorial orders. To open criminal cases, that's the formal wording, covering 21 alleged criminal acts. The crimes allegedly committed by Macierewicz and his subordinates included disclosure of classified and other protected information to unauthorized persons, meaning they brought in independent experts and, of course, briefed them on the case. Failure to provide investigative materials at the prosecutor's request. Yes, they realized the prosecutor's office wanted to interfere, so they simply didn't hand over what they had, providing documents to people not authorized to handle them. Again, bringing in outside experts. And that's not all. There were also financial abuses. About 150 million zlotys spent. That's roughly $30 million. $30 миллионов долларов. Вот так вот, правдолюбы. $30 миллионов долларов. Gone like a cow's tongue had licked it away. That too needed to be investigated. There was also a case about the destruction of the Tu-154M aircraft, tail number 102, a valuable state asset, in such a way as to make it impossible to restore its airworthiness. You get it? No? I'll explain. For conducting real-world experiments, possibly with that same birch tree and wing, they used a Tu-154M with tail number 120. And as a result of these experiments, they ruined it. Yes, this is called causing major material damage to state property. And since this was already in 2024, and by that time we had seen a lot, I immediately recalled. Ukrainians, Kyivans will remember this story well. There's Zhuliany Airport, not near Kyiv, but literally within the city limits. On February 24th, the full-scale invasion begins. And it turns out that this airport is completely unguarded. No ground troops, no air defenses, nothing at all. Just fly in and land an airborne assault. One Il-76 after another. So, volunteers under retired Armed Forces General Krivanos immediately decided to act. They rendered the runway unusable. They poured used oil all over it, so planes couldn't stop, and would just roll until they ran off the end. And they blocked the strip with barricades made from whatever was at hand. In doing so, of course, they damaged a lot of metal structures to create those barricades and obstacles. But they also damaged the runway itself. That meant it would have to be restored to working condition. And who would do it? That costs money. As a result, yes, a criminal case was opened against General Krivanos for causing major damage to state property. So things like this happen. Things like this happen. As a result, on May 29th of this year, 2025, one of Poland's most popular radio stations, Radio Z, and no, it has nothing to do with Russian Z symbols. This is Z spelled with 3 letters. The oldest, first independent, non-state radio station in Poland, founded back in 1990 after the regime fell, and still hugely popular, often ranked first or second in audience share. They could afford to invite for a morning show none other than former President Bronisław Komorowski. They were having a relaxed conversation. You can see he's dressed casually. Komorowski is an avid hunter. The talk turns to that subject. A listener calls the studio and asks a question. The host relays it to his guest. Which hunting trophy are you most proud of? Truly proud of? Komorowski thinks for a moment and says, a double shot at a drake. The host's face changes. A double shot at a drake. What does that mean? It means 2 people fire at the same time and bang, bang, 2 drakes fall. Now, let me put this into context for you. Just a minute earlier, Komorowski had been talking about how much he enjoys hunting deer, stags, and that in Poland, the stag hunting season was just opening, and he would soon be going. A fascinating, exciting, romantic hunt. How much he loves it. So, this is my assumption. I believe that a passionate hunter, whose biography includes a successful stag hunt, could hardly consider his greatest achievement to be 2 ducks you could just as easily buy at the nearest supermarket. No, this was clearly some sort of allegory, some sort of metaphor. Now, 2 comments, one linguistic, one political. The linguistic one is extremely simple. In Polish, duck is kacka, and the male, the drake, is kadzor. Surnames are not translated, but let's say the Russian equivalent of Kaczynski would be Utkin or Utinsky. And since the Kaczyński brothers were men, the proper parallel here is to Drake's. Now, the political context. On the day of Lech Kaczynski's death, April 10th, 2010, Mr. Bronisław Komorowski was Marshal of the Sejm, the Speaker of Parliament, and under the Polish Constitution, in the situation that arose, it was he, the Marshal of the Sejm, who became acting president. Then came early elections, and in those early elections, Komorowski won. And who did he defeat in the second round? He defeated Jarosław Kaczyński, Lech Kaczyński's twin brother. Thus, this tragic story we have been discussing for over an hour had a direct impact on Mr. Komorowski's biography. What's noteworthy to me is that in modern Poland, such vivid metaphors and pointed jokes are considered socially acceptable. And now, as I promised, some new conclusions based on new facts and events that have occurred since April 2010. What we see is a very clear staircase of, for now, 3 steps. Step 1, April 2010. The collective Putin, the gang of Chekists who run Russia, killed 96 people. A very modest number. 96 people. Yes, high-ranking people and leaders of a neighboring state. Everyone around kept silent. No one, including the government of Poland itself, expressed even concern. No one expressed concern? Well, bloggers said something, bloggers squeaked. But that's irrelevant. And at the same time, note that on this first step, on the first little step, the perpetrator categorically does not confess. Categorically. The perpetrator went full, we know nothing. No, it wasn't us. Of course it wasn't us. This is nonsense. What are we even talking about? We have nothing to do with this. It all slid off his hands. 4 years pass, a bit more than 4 years. And the summer of 2014 begins. The war in the Donbass, a kind of hybrid proxy war, a war mostly fought by other hands, but also with, again, the covert use of regular, proper units of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. The death toll already runs into the thousands, already thousands. Among those thousands, hundreds of dead children, cities destroyed, homes destroyed. Several million people became refugees. Just like that, in Europe, in the 21st century, several million people were forced to drop everything, their arranged lives, and run somewhere. Not everyone managed to flee. A huge number of civilians were abducted, tortured, tormented, and so on. The international community expressed concern. One cannot deny it. Expressed concern, but did not provide Ukraine with any military assistance. As for the perpetrator, his behavior had already changed. No, in explicit form, the Russian leadership, Putin, never admitted that they were waging a war against Ukraine, that in the Donbass there were fighting regular military units of the Russian army. But the very denial took the form of such a mocking, sneering acknowledgement. Who's fighting there? Those are our vacationers, officers on leave. They went on vacation. Well, some people go to the beach, some go hunting. Our officers go to do some fighting. Where did they get tanks? They bought them at the Wuntorg, the army store. And where's this army store? Well, look for it. If you need it, you look for where that army store is. That kind of jeering, taunting, formal denial, which in essence is practically an admission. And that slid off his hands too, completely slid off his hands. They still sat at the same table with him, shook his hand, called him a colleague, invited him to all sorts of summits, the G8, the G20, and so on. Another 8 years pass, and on the morning of February 24th, 2022, Mr. Putin appears on television with no more equivocations, no more vacationers. They're not there. In plain text, he says, I have made the decision. I have made, not the Federation Council, not the Security Council. It's I, Vova Putin, who have made the decision to begin a full-scale invasion. And it began, and it continues. And at this moment, and this time, the human death toll has already gone into the hundreds of thousands, already into the hundreds of thousands. And the dead children are now counted in the thousands, and the refugees are now counted in the tens of millions, and cities are destroyed, and homes are destroyed, and there is a vast number of illegally abducted persons, and a terrorist regime on the occupied territory, the full program. The only one crime so far that Putin, the collective Putin, has not yet committed. All the rest they have already committed. This one remains the only one. This time, the world community woke up a little. One cannot deny it. The world community, the United States, European countries, and possibly that very same Poland. This time, they did not limit themselves. No, they did not limit themselves to merely expressing deep concern. And on the other hand, of course, the pushback is not the kind of pushback that could stop his actions, the actions of this criminal. Watching this sequence, we can, without much effort, assume what the next little steps might be. Today, August 6th, 2025. This deserves special mention, especially if he is not firmly restrained, not firmly held by the hands. One observation and a second observation. In the first case, the murder of President Kaczyński and the Polish delegation, and in the second case, the hybrid war in eastern Ukraine, and in the third case, the full-scale invasion, the full-scale war. In all these cases, the key, the most important, forgive me, I don't like this expression, but here it is absolutely precise. The critically important factor is the presence of a fifth column. A fifth column inside the country of the victim, the future victim, and the closest interaction with that fifth column. Neither the first, nor the second, nor the third crime would have been possible without the closest interaction with the fifth column, without its presence, without its activity. In my view, this is clearly visible to everyone. Further, this staircase, these little steps, especially the last step, should, it seems to me, lead all sensible people, not necessarily smart, just normal, sensible people, to a certain logical conclusion with regard to Putin and the collective Putin. With regard to the Chekist regime, the question, what for? What's the purpose? When they commit crimes is pointless. There's no need to ask it. It's irrelevant. It's not about them. The question, what for, is not about them. There can only be the question why, and as to why, there is an answer. I will begin with a very simple, in my opinion, very illustrative and correct analogy. There is an animal called a ferret, a mustelid, a predator. It needs to eat. It needs to eat. In the wild, it hunts all sorts of small prey, including wild birds, both ground-dwelling and flying. Over the last 1,000 years, it has figured out that there are humans, and humans have hen houses, where fat, well-fed, meaty chickens, birds, are concentrated in one place, and they can't even run away from there, and they can't fly away either. So the ferret digs under and gets into the hen house, and once inside the hen house, it kills one after another, until either the chickens run out, or, drawn by strange sounds, the owner comes running with a club, with a shotgun, or with something else. If the owner does not come running, then it will kill until it kills every last one. The question, what for? What's the pragmatic sense? Has no answer. Well, it can't carry them away with it. It can't eat them.